Hi everyone, I'm Ali, I'm an architect, and today we're going to talk about the ARB Part 3 criteria. So let's go. Okay guys, so the reason I'm making a video on this topic is that the ARB Part 3 criteria is really helpful for you. So if you're filling out PEDR sheets, then you should be logging experience against the Part 3 criteria, so that when you get to your Part 3 and your PEDR is evaluated against all your other submissions for your Part 3, then it'll be obvious that you've kind of already met quite a lot of those criteria. That's what we're looking for. It's also a great document to familiarise yourself with when you're doing your PEDR, because it lets you know what kind of things you might have experienced and what kind of things you might be missing in your experience. And it's a good way to kind of see what you might need to be focusing on, and you can then ask within your office if there's any chance for you to be able to do that kind of work. The other reason to focus on it is if you are a Part 3 student or you're about to become a Part 3 student, you want to use the ARB professional criteria to grade yourself against, basically. Every Part 3 course asks for a career appraisal. Basically, sometimes it has a slightly different name, but basically it's asking you to look back on your career from Part 1-ish, maybe a little bit before if you did like work experience and things, up to the present day, and how every decision that you've made, how experience that you've done in different practices has kind of given you all of these professional criteria. So this is basically that document. The link for the document itself is below as well. And I'm just going to go through a little bit about it so that it kind of makes sense to you. So as you can see here, this is PC1 of the 5, and this is professionalism. And the first 2 paragraphs are basically telling you what kind of skills, or rather the kind of terms that the examiners are looking for. And that's split into different kind of things. They're looking for knowledge, understanding, ability, and skills as 4 different kinds of achievements is how they refer to them. So what required achievements you have. So when you read it, you can kind of see how that's broken down. So the first one is kind of the understanding. So the successful candidate will demonstrate overall competence and the ability to behave with integrity in the ethical and professional manner appropriate to the role of an architect. So that is looking at your understanding of that and also your ability to do that, and they expect you to have that ability. Then the second sentence, the candidate will have the skills necessary to undertake effective communication and presentation, organisation, self-management and autonomous working. So the key word there is skills. They want to specifically see those skills in your PEDR and also in what you submit at Part 3. So that is your career appraisal, also your case study if you have one where you're doing your Part 3, and also your examinations, and obviously also your interview. So then on to the second paragraph here. So the candidate will have a clear understanding of the architect's obligation to society and the profession, and a sufficient awareness of the limits of their competence and professional experience to ensure that they are unlikely to bring the profession into disrepute. So again, that's looking at understanding and also knowledge. So it's like knowing, as I've said in previous videos, what knowledge you have, but also what knowledge you don't have. So the thing the Part 3 is really guarding against is architects undertaking work that they are not sort of qualified to do, and understanding that being qualified as an architect does not make you a specialist in any particular field, and kind of being aware of that. And the last bit there is kind of key to not do anything that would bring the profession into disrepute, essentially. So those are what they're looking for. And obviously, specifically, you're looking at these kind of keywords because that's the kind of different level they're looking for with different things. So obviously the first one, like we said, they're looking for like the ability for any candidate to act with overall competence and integrity, and be professional in their work. That's, I mean, essentially quite a simple thing to do as long as you do that within your day-to-day job and make sure that you maintain it. And the second is kind of a little bit more detailed because they're looking for you to have skills specific for communication, presentation, organisation, self-management and autonomous working. And you can demonstrate those throughout your PEDR because you probably will have been doing that pretty much since you were a Part 1. And then obviously the second paragraph where they're looking at kind of understanding is more what they're sort of testing you on, in the sense that you understand the broader realms of the architect's obligation to society and the profession. And that you have awareness of your own competence and your professional experience and what you don't have experience of. And that's something that comes with being critical of your own experience and reflecting, which is something that's very much encouraged at Part 3 as well. So basically, you can do this with every single one of the professional criteria. You want to take the first paragraphs before you get into these points and actually break them down as to what particular achievements they're looking for. And they call it achievements because it's broken down across those categories: knowledge, understanding, ability, and skills. And they require different levels of achievement for each. And so basically that's what you're trying to get towards as any kind of architecture student. So if you're filling out PEDR, for example, then I wouldn't bother using these 10 points. Each one of the professional criteria, each one of the 5 has 10 sub-points underneath it. I think that if you go into those in a PEDR sheet, that's a little bit too detailed. What you want to be doing in PEDR is saying, for example, I managed my own work and managed to do that effectively on time. I produced my own presentations and I organised it all. It was an example of professionalism PC1. Something like that is all you really need to do. When you get into part 3 is when you need to start caring much more about these 10 sub-points. If you feel like you specifically called out one and not another in a PEDR, then of course do reference them. But I think it's just the level of detail is not necessarily relevant for that kind of thing, which is an overview sheet really is what your PEDR is. So if we scroll down a little bit, we're still in PC1, professionalism, and then you can see that it has the 10 sub-points. And you'll see here that these can become kind of a lot more onerous. And as you've kind of been given the key in the first paragraphs, you'll kind of be able to understand which ones you need to have what kind of level of achievement on each. So which ones you need to have knowledge of or actual skills in and the ability to do. So basically all of these things will have been touched on somewhere in your architectural education and then also again in your part 3, and you'll use a lot of them in your day-to-day work, but you might not be very much you might not be thinking obviously in these terms. You're not really equating everything you do in practice against the ARB professional criteria, and equally if you're a part 1 or part 2 student, then you're not kind of equating everything you do at uni to one of these like sub 10 points. Basically, it's just having awareness of all of them. And PC1 is probably one of the easier kind of professional criteria to get to grips with. As I said, they're a really good way to find out where the gaps in your knowledge are is by reading through these and seeing if there's anything that you're not really aware of. But let's take, for example, 1.10, which is the last one. So continuing professional development, so CPD. That is currently required by the RIBA. If you are a chartered member of the RIBA, you have to do so much CPD a year and you have to log it on their online CPD kind of logger tracker so they can keep an eye on what you're doing. And to be a member, you are required to undertake that CPD to so many hours a year across different subjects. For part 3, you might be asked that. So you might be asked how many hours it is, what kind of topics are covered, and why it's required. If you're looking at the news at the moment, then the ARB are also looking into having their own CPD requirements in their code of conduct. So that might be something else that comes up in your part 3. So you see then that 1.10 has become like its whole load of questions just on its own. Obviously 1.4, for example, they're asking you institutional memberships, benefits, obligations, and codes of conduct. So obviously you have to know the ARB ones because you're asking to become an architect by doing your part 3. Which means that you would be allowed to register with the ARB and then be on the Architects Register. So they're also asking you what other institutional memberships there are, also what their codes of conduct are. So this includes the ARB Code of Conduct, but also ones from RIBA, the RIAS, the RIAI, all of those kind of institutional memberships. And you need to know what the benefits are, what the obligations of being a member of those bodies are, and also what their individual codes of conduct are. And they often are quite back to back, but you need to know that there is different ones and that they're all very slightly different. So you realise how much learning there is just in 2 points there of one of the professional criteria. And so that's the point really, which is why I'm saying get to grips with this document as soon as possible and start using it in your PEDR so it becomes a little bit more familiar to you before you start undertaking your part 3. So to pass part 3, you need to be showing that you've met these criteria in all of your submissions and your oral examinations. That's your interview at the end of your part 3. Gaps in them are going to be questioned or going to lead to you potentially failing. So you want to be aware of what all of them are. And if you feel like you're having weaknesses in any of them, you can address those before you get to your part 3, or at least before you finish your part 3. So let's take a very quick look at the second as well, and then we'll go through what all of the professional criteria are, but you really should look at them in your own time and make sure you're familiar with them. If you have any questions, then drop them in the comments below. If this video is being helpful so far, guys, then please do drop a like on it, because it will really help in getting other people to be able to see these videos, and subscribe if you'd like to see more of this content. I'd be super happy to have you. So the second one we're going to look at is PC2, which is clients, users and delivery of services. So again, you can see it's laid out pretty much like the one before. You have a first kind of introductory paragraph, and then you have the sub 10 points. So again, if you're watching this as someone completing your PEDR, part 1 or part 2 student, I would be saying all you need to reference is PC2 as a headline in your PEDR. You did that, you did some PC2. If you're a part 3 student, then you should be thinking about the 10 sub-points and making sure that you don't have any gaps in your knowledge. And the reason I'm just going to show you this second one in a little bit more detail as well is because you start to see how much more complicated they suddenly get. Like PC1 seems like it's quite doable, like it's reasonable to know all of that stuff and to act that way in your day-to-day life. PC2 is already much more detailed because of what they're asking you to know about. And each one of the words that's in the sub-points can be a whole piece of research in itself. So first of all, let's read the top paragraphs. A successful candidate will be able to demonstrate understanding of the range of services offered by architects and delivering those services in a manner prioritising the interests of the client and other stakeholders. So again, as we were saying, the keywords of what these are asking for, they're asking you to have an understanding of that at this point. So they're not asking you to have the ability or the skills to do all of those things. They're asking you to have an understanding of all the range of services offered by architects, even if you haven't personally undertaken all of them. And also how you would deliver those services where you prioritise the interests of your client and other stakeholders. So obviously, again, architecture is a customer service job, essentially, and your client is your boss in that way, but you're also a professional. You're trying to help guide them in the way that's most in their interests. So their interests are always paramount in what you're doing. And that's what they're kind of asking you there to understand and to know, and also to understand who other stakeholders might be in some sort of client relationship as well. So that obviously is a whole topic in itself. So the second sentence is the candidate will have the skills necessary to provide a competent service, both singly and as part of a team, including understanding of clients' needs, appropriate communication, programming, coordination, and competent delivery. So again, this sentence is asking for the skills necessary to provide that. So you need to show that you know how to do that. You know how to provide and have provided a competent service, both on your own and as part of a team, that you understand your clients' needs and that you can understand them and feed them back to them, that you've always done appropriate communication, that you've been able to program and resource time and delivery of things, coordinate different consultants and different pieces of work together, and to deliver something competently and as agreed with your client. So it's asking for skills there. That's direct experience of that. The third sentence is this will be supported by knowledge of the briefing process, forms and terms of appointment, the means of professional remuneration, relevant legislation, and the execution of appropriate programmed and coordinated project tasks. So knowledge of is the key bit that we're looking at here. So it's not asking, therefore, for skills of all of these. It's asking for you personally to have knowledge of them. And this is kind of the bulk of what you're learning at part 3, is things like forms and terms of appointment, means of professional remuneration, legal legislation, and all that kind of legal aspect to an architect's job. And they're asking you for knowledge of all of that and to be able to prove that you have the knowledge of all of that. Now, obviously, a lot of that will come from some of your examination work in your part 3, where the exam questions are specifically trying to tease out of you proof that you know those things. But it doesn't harm you if in any way you have experience of these directly, or that you do your own research so that you know a bit more. If they feel like you have gaps there, you'll be asked about these kind of things in your interview. And so it's always good to know enough to be able to answer those competently. Okay, so then below that we can see the 10 sub-points. And let's again just pull out some that start to maybe bring up things that you might not have looked at before. So 2.3 is the architect's contracts, terms of engagement, scope of services, and relevant legislation. That's something that, unless you're party to that at your office, you might not have seen a lot of. In your masters, you should have touched on it. But what contracts architects use, the terms of their engagement, so the required terms of their engagement, which is an ARB code of conduct thing, and also bodies such as the RIBA as well have their own rules about what needs to be in those terms of engagement, what the scope of services is, and to make sure that's clear for everybody. That means the architect and the client, and all of the relevant legislation against those things. So that would be like consumer rights under contracts and things like that. You need to be able to prove you know all of that, and that's just one sub point. So this is kind of trying to show you how much you need to kind of read around things and know of things in your part 3. And that's why this is such a really good document to get yourself comfortable with early on, because you're going to be able to see in this and go, bloody hell, I have no idea what 2.4 obligations to stakeholders, warranties and third-party rights means. I absolutely don't know. And if you don't know that, then great, because you've just realised where you don't have some knowledge, which, as we know, is in PC1, and you can go about and make sure that you do know that knowledge, especially by the time you get to the interview stage of your part 3. So don't see it as overfacing and terrifying if you don't know some of these things. It's a way of helping you form your revision and what you should be focusing on by going through this and seeing what you know and what you maybe don't know or don't feel as confident on, even if you do know about it. Another one that is probably just worth calling out, I mean, they're all obviously equally worthy, but 2.9, intellectual property rights and copyright law, often comes up in part 3, so always good to know that. And 2.10, specifically professional liability, negligence and professional indemnity, including insurance, always brought up in part 3. It's always important. It's part of the codes of conduct of every single architectural body, the ARB, the RIBA, RIS, etc., etc. So definitely familiarising yourself with all of that is critical. Okay, guys, so that's it for our super deep dive. So I'm just going to basically read out to you what the whole 5 PC professional criteria are for part 3, and reiterate to you again, like a pain in the arse, why they're important for dealing with your PEDR and also for dealing with your part 3. So PC1 is professionalism. We've already had a quick look at that and broken it down a bit. And I think it's kind of the one that's basically a win, as long as you're not acting like a loose cannon in your day-to-day. You're probably being professional. You just need to look at the ways that are specifically kind of abilities and skills that you need to have, and make sure that you're doing those, and make sure that you get experience of them if you don't already have it. The second is PC2, that's clients, users and delivery of services. We've also had a quick look at that. It's a little bit more in depth, and obviously they get more in depth the more you go through the 5, so I've took the easy way out by just showing you the first 2 and leaving you the other 3 for yourself. The next is PC3, that's legal framework and processes. Again, the way it's laid out in the criteria, linked below in the description, is with a big paragraph at the front, which you should be breaking down based on those keywords to know how much knowledge or experience or ability, skills, etc. you need of each of the points. And then it's got the 10 sub-points as per the rest of the professional criteria. PC4 is my personal weakness. That's practice and management. So mainly about kind of business running and all practice structures, resourcing, all those kind of things. That's a great one to brush up on, especially if you're in a small practice that might not do all of those things. The reason I was weak on it is small practice for a lot of years. So it's a great one to do. And as we've mentioned in previous videos, the RIBA's practice management book is a great one for that, because it basically is that. And a lot of part 3 courses focus on it kind of specifically. And then finally is PC5, and that's building procurement. So that's dealing with different kinds of procurement, different contracts and the processes on site, and also any kind of claims that might occur if that doesn't all go to plan. So that's another one that you need to familiarise yourself with. All of these have that basic layout that we've looked at, where there's a big paragraph at the top that's telling you what achievements you need to have between knowledge, understanding, ability and skills. So read those, get familiar with that. And then the 10 sub-points are much more specific. So the quick basic overview of the rules, guys, if you're doing your PEDR, then make sure that you are referencing your experience to one of the 5 criteria, but don't bother going into the 10 sub-points. I don't think, that's my opinion, just because I think it gets a little bit too detailed, especially if someone's reviewing that at your part 3 exam. That could be a bit of a pain in the arse. Essentially, you're trying to say that I've done that, and what you have done should be self-explanatory of where it fits within that professional criteria. And then if you're doing your part 3, do really get familiar with all of it, including those 10 sub-points, and make sure that you understand what every single one of those words means in every single one of those 10 sub-points. And if there's areas that you're weak on, use it as your roadmap for your revision and what you should be focusing on. Okay, guys, so that's it for today. It's an intro to the ARB professional criteria for part 3. which is a way more useful document than you might think, and probably isn't brought up enough at university and at part 3 for helping you kind of form your revision around, and also for helping you reference in your PEDR, so by the time you get to part 3, your PEDR has already recorded that you're probably hitting at least some of all of the 5. So I hope you have a great day wherever you are, guys. That's it for now. Find all the links in the post description. If you have any comments, and do let me know, please do drop a like because it's super helpful for me, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks. Bye. So as I said already, the part 3 criteria, fuck that.